Hey, my name is Patrick, and today we're going to talk about Varivalve, the good, bad, and the ugly of this valve. So this is our very nice looking Varivalve. It's made out of, the construction of it's very good. It always feels very nice and significant in your hands. And what it does, when it's attached to a steam radiator, when the air is being pushed out through this nipple, it comes out through this flat opening right here, and it's called Varivalve because you vary the rate of expelling of this air from the radiator. And again, as you know, it's very important for the steam radiator to have the valve like this, so that when the steam enters the radiator, it keeps pushing the air out, and it has to have an opening through which it can escape. And the purpose of a valve like this is that when the steam reaches this valve, then the internal mechanism closes it, so that the steam is entrapped inside the radiator, and then inside the radiator it gives off its heat to the metal of the radiator, in the process also condensing, and the condensate flows out of the radiator that's hopefully properly pitched towards the entrance. So it's a very popular valve. You can see it on many steam systems, and it has the sort of valve that has quite a lot of positives and unfortunately quite a lot of negatives as well. So let's talk a little bit about the basic principle of it. So this is the cross section of the valve. You can see it's like this. So the air enters through, is being pushed out through this, and goes around this this kind of, it's not really a ball, but it's like kind of like a venting. Let's call it ball for the sake of conversation, and it goes around this bellow, and then comes out through this slit, that, as I said, you can vary the amount of opening. So this is wide open. It says on the top as well. Towards this is open, towards this is closed, and this is so-called all closed, but in essence it's not. It's because of the way the valve is constructed. Even when the valve is so-called closed, it still releases a little bit of air, so that you cannot use this valve to completely close off the radiator. Let's say if you're doing some experimentation, or you have one radiator in a place that shouldn't heat up, because let's say it's close to the thermostat and it's offsetting your steam balance. So maybe if you have this radiator valve, you might say, oh, I can close it. You close it all the way, and no matter what, this radiator always heats up at least a little bit, because no matter what, it always releases a little bit of air. On the other hand, the positives of it is that this opening is huge in comparison to other air valves. So in that sense, it can release tremendous amount of push out tremendous amount of air when it's wide open. So that's a very good quality in certain situations. Again, in the theory is that your main vent should vent majority of the air from your system, and then the air valves on your radiator should vent a relatively small amount of air, so that this sort of wide opening almost should be too big for a typical situation. But again, as we know, the theory often is very vastly different than the practice. So yeah, it's a very nice valve in that sense. And then the principle is that, as I said, so the air is expelled through this valve, through this opening, and then when there's no more air in the radiator, at least very little, the steam reaches this opening right here. This bellows right here heats up and expand, and as it expands, it pushes this ball down, and thus sealing the opening. So in theory, no more steam can escape this valve. That's the theory. It sounds beautiful. The practice is a bit different. The practice is that those valves are notorious for failure. That said, the failure happens in a very interesting way, so that even when they fail, they still kind of work. So what ends up happening is that the glue, or whatever it's holding the metal bellows to this ball valve disintegrates, and then what ends up happening is that this ball valve falls off, and obviously gravity pulls it down, so it de facto seals this opening right here. So the next time when the radiator tries to release the air out of it, it can't, because this ball valve is preventing it. again, that's not exactly true, because the air at the very beginning of the heating cycle, when there's very little push of the steam of the air, indeed this thing is sealed shut. However, soon after the boiler starts warming up, there's more steam being generated. Then more steam pushes the air through the system. And then because this ball is just very, and one of the materials made from, it's very, very lightweight, so all of a sudden the air trying to escape pushed past this ball, lifts this ball just slightly, and then the air does indeed escape. So in that sense, it's a non-working valve at the very beginning of the heating system, then starts being a working valve, and then, because when this finally the power of steam reaches this ball, lifts it, surrounds this bellow with steam, the steam heats up, and again, in theory, and often that's the case, it expands and closes back this valve, and then kind of trapping the steam inside. So in that sense, it is a kind of working valve, even when it's not. Now, when it's doing that, this kind of process of trying to lift this ball valve, what ends up happening, this part up here heats up, and then the steam heating cold metal, by definition, was called condensate. And then, so you have quite a lot of condensate right here, and so because of that, this valve tends to spit out lots of water. So in other words, the air enters it, then at some point there's steam as well, and then this ball heats up, condensate happens, and then quite a lot of water spits out through this opening. Lots is a relative term on a decently working system with a low PS pressure, let's say 1.5 2 pounds of pressure. You will see a few droplets, unless there's something wrong with, let's say, the pitch of the radiator and so on. So few droplets, not end of the world. So in that sense, it's still a decently working valve. The positive of this so-called working, non-working valve, let's call it, is that it heats up the radiator quite nicely. Again, if the system overall is working well, so that means the main is properly vented, so the pressure doesn't build up too high. The pressure is relatively low, let's say 1.5, maybe 2 psi maximum. So because of that, there's not too much stuff that comes out through this valve, and because it keeps on releasing this air, then even when it's kind of not working, so the radiator does tend to heat up quite well, quite nicely. The problem might happen is that around this ball there's a seal, there's a rubber seal. So the idea is that basically, like when the bellow expands and this ball hits this opening, that there's an extra layer of sealing. Sometimes this ball, when we screw in the valve, and by the way, you can, if you hear it, this rattling inside, that means the ball has detached from the bellows. So that means it's a kind of non-working valve. And the reason why I know it is because actually this valve was working quite decently. It was heating up the radiator, closing when it's supposed to, and so on. However, when you kind of moving the valve around, when you try and screw it in or screw it out, then that seal may dislodge and all of a sudden create this kind of situation where the seal is not a proper place, so you might have a hard time sealing or unsealing. So technically speaking, if you're being a perfectionist, this rattling valve should be replaced. So and those valves do have a high percentage rate of probably at least half the valves I remove in my house from my radiators are rattling inside. So that means they kind of work, kind of not. Non-working valve sometimes is helpful. Like I have one radiator that I don't care. I love the fact that it heats up throughout the whole heating system, heating coil. Should I replace it? Will I replace it? Probably with some other valve. Yes, probably I will. But so far, some of those valves are decently working. And is that it about this valve? So let's talk about really quickly what happens if your system is actually not properly working. So as you know, you should have a low PSI on your steam heatings. and you should be set to like 2 pounds maximum, so that basically at 2 pounds of pressure the system cuts off, and the boiler cuts off until the pressure gets back to whatever you set it. Let's call it like half a pound of pressure. The problem with that is there's multiple problems. Problem number one is that pressure throws are notorious for failure, or rather for being set incorrectly. And that I mean that the spring, kind of like the dial is showing different than 2 pounds of pressure, but rather that the internals of the pressure throw are not calibrated, and because of that people really don't know what pressure they actually are running. Often people do not have a precision gauge attached to the boiler. The boiler has usually the 30 psi gauge attached to it, which barely moves between 0 and 2 pounds, so you kind of never know what's going on. And that was actually the case with my boiler setup, where pressure throw, even quotation mark working pressure throw, was not working, and was letting pressure to build up to something like 7-8 psi. And when you have 7-8 psi, those valves do start spitting like crazy. And again, spitting is related to all sorts of factors, including whether the steam is wet or dry, which is kind of relative term. So yeah, those valves, because they have this internal problem where they kind of work, kind of don't. That also means that you cannot vent it on very this kind of, if your valve is broken, that is this sealing ball detaches, then you do need a little bit of force to push it. How can you test it? Well, the easiest thing to test it is that by obviously removing the valve from a radiator. So you just unscrew it, then you open this slot right here, and then you blow on it, and then try to maintain the same kind of strength of your blowing, the velocity of your breathing, and then flip it around, and then you will see whether the same strength, whether the passage, and you can hear it, whether the passage of air is the same or something changes. Because again, on a cold valve, the ball should be up here. So that means whatever you're blowing on it should have no effect whether it's upside down or right side up. So just for the purposes of testing, let's see what I can. So this is I'm going to blow on it right now, and I hope maybe the camera is going to pick up the difference in the sound quality from when I blow it right side up, and then I'm going to flip it upside down. So if you heard it, it starts with very kind of delicate, and then when I flip the valve upside down, that means this ball dislodges. It starts blowing tremendous amount of air. So that means it's kind of a broken valve. So in essence, it should be replaced. Unfortunately, since all those Varivalves are not all, but a tremendous amount of them dislodge the seal right here breaks. So it's not like I'm gonna get a new valve, even a working valve, that it's not gonna break within a year or 2 years. So hit or miss. I would want to love those valves, but they're not that great ultimately.